Yes, hi. The topic today is approaches to management, and here we'll study the various historical and contemporary approaches to management theory. These approaches demonstrate the evolution of the understanding of the functions, roles, skills, and effect of a manager on an organization, but they do not solely focus on the manager part only. Uh, because these theory also explore the organizational structure, individual efficiency, models, and workers' behavior related to the psychological and sociological factors. And so, I guess that is why they hold a very important place. The classical, behavioral, and modern approaches. So, we'll be discussing all of them. There'll be a small introduction, then after that, you can skip, of course. Okay, enough. Yeah, right from the beginning, there has been a lot of changes and development in the field of approaches toward the management. Like in various ways, there is various approaches that has defined what management is and how it shall be defined. So, if we take the major categories, then we can divide them among the three main parts. The very first is classical or the traditional approach, then it's the neoclassical or the behavioral approach, and then, of course, the modern management theory. So, we'll see the different categories and their subdivisions further. Like if we see the classical approach, the very first one, then it can be divided into three further parts: the scientific management approach, the bureaucratic organization approach, and the administrative approach. Similarly, if we get into the neoclassical part, then it can be divided among the two heads or the two kinds of approaches, which is behavioral science approach and the social system approach. Further, the modern approach can be divided in three parts, which is system approach, contingency approach, and mathematical approach. So now, these were the three major categories and their subdivisions. If we want to know further about the major, or I mean, the famous thinkers and their work, which made their mark. So, under the very first part, classical approach, the scientific management approach part has names, three famous names, which are listed here, along with their work, which made a difference and they got very famous. That is why, like the Frederick W. Taylor, and his work was Principles of Scientific Management in 1911, where he explained the scientific management approach. And further, his post contributors like Mr. Henry Gant, Mr. Frank and Lillian Gilbreth, so and their respective works. Similarly, under the modern organizational or the administrative approach, the name and the work. This is just for an information that under these approaches, who were the famous contributors and the name of their contribution, of course. You can pause the video and just go through them as per your requisition or the requirement. Now we'll get into a little detail. So we'll take the very first, which is the classical approach. So here, as we know, I've already saw that in the last to last slide, that the major or the most famous name was Frederick Winslow Taylor. And so this entire part, the scientific management approach, the entire era, the entire history of this scientific management approach part can be divided into two major parts, which are Taylor's era and the post Taylor era. He made such a huge mark in the contribution in the field of scientific management that he was regarded as the father of scientific management, because he was the very first to talk about the scientific management part, and his fundamental principles are enlisted below, like science is not a rule of thumb, Harmony, he favored harmony, and there shall be no discord. There has to be cooperation and not individualism. So that is why there has to be maximum output when there is maximum cooperation and understanding. And of course, the development of each employee has to be there. There has to be, he actually completely discarded the discrimination part, and he was in the favor of the thought that there has to be maximum development of each employee. There has to be an equal focus on each and every employee, and that is how we can attain cooperation and of course a high level of efficiency, as a result of which we can reach to the maximum output. So these are the important features of his system, like where he talked about that there has to be a separation of planning and execution. The two departments shall be completely different from each other. There has to be interdependence and coordination, but there has to be separate independent department for planning and similarly for the execution part. Then he talked about the functional foremanship, where there has to be specialized foremans. There has to be an appointment of the specialized foremans on each and every level. Then there has to be work studies, more and more of work studies and research on the work and how it has to be done. There has to be scientific selection in tramping. I mean, tramping is like taking one step at a time, taking one heavy step at a time with complete planning. Then there has to be standardization everywhere. There has to be incentive wage system for encouragement, of course, and development of each employee. There has to be latest machinery and technology for better implementation. There has to be good quality raw material, efficient cost accounting system, scientific allocation of work, healthy environment, and use of scientific techniques like charts, graphs, manuals, slide rules, etc. So in a way, he talked about this entire standardization, which has to be based on modern technology, equal focus on the workmen, and of course, their specialization. So that is why it was called as scientific management. Now, after the Taylor's era, the post-Taylor's era, the main name that contributed or could make it market was Henry H. Gantt. He was Taylor's associate only, and his main contribution, as you must have had heard about Gantt chart, why it was famous, because it could show the routine and scheduling of operation up to the level of completion of any activity. So, what he contributed through, he gave the revised Taylor's incentive wage plan. He talked about the participative management style. Further, there were Frank B. Gilbreth and Lillian M. Gilbreth. They also made some significant contributions to the same scientific management movement that Taylor started. And they also added the human factor as a very, very essential part of management. So they gave a diversified angle to it also. And they developed time and motion studies also. So they even refined that theory much ahead further, and in a very much human factor focused way. The next is bureaucracy approach, where the main name that comes in our mind or in record is Mr. Max Weber, who was a German scientist, and he defined bureaucracy as a highly structured and formalized impersonal organization. Here, the human factor was not being taken as a main focus, but he talked about the hierarchical structure. There has to be a clear, defined hierarchy where there has to be a upper level, then the subordinate level has to be there, and everything has to be very much formally organized and structured. So that bureaucracy, according to him, had need to have some characteristics which I listed below. Like there has to be specialization of labor, formal set of rules and regulation, well-defined hierarchy within the organization, and impersonality in the application of rules. Meaning to say that everything needs to be very much structured and formal in his way of working, or in his I mean defined way of organization. There has to be specialization of worker or the labor or the workman who's been assigned to a particular department. That person has to be specialized in his work. The rules shall be very firm and formal and well defined, And the hierarchy has to be well defined also, so that those rules can be implemented very well and the entire work can be done in a very structured, formal manner. Now there were six major principles that he talked about under his hierarchical structure or the system, that there has to be, there has to be a formal hierarchical structure, as we already discussed, that each level needs to control the level below it. All right. So he talked about the formal hierarchy, which has to be the basis of the central planning, and there has to be a centralized decision making. Like in the last approach, we studied that every employee is important, and there has to be separate departments for everything, and there has to be a specialized four-man-ship. So here he talked about the centralized decision making system, which was little different, because he talked about the bureaucratic system. Now there has to be rule based management that he talked about. There has to be firm rules at every level, and the lower level seamlessly execute the decision. They cannot question their upper level. They just need to execute that decision which is being made at higher levels. Then he talked about the functional specialty organization, which means that the specialists do the work. The organization divides employee into units based on the type of work they do or the skill they possess. So, meaning to say that there has to be specialization in each department, and the department shall be divided according to that specialization only. Now, the up focused or the in focused mission, where he talked about what shall be the focus of the organization. So, if the mission of the organization is to serve the stockholders, the board, or any other agency that has given power to that organization, then it has to be up focused. Whereas, if the mission is to serve the organization itself and those within it, generating profit for itself, then it is in focused. So in a way he divided that what has to be the main focus here and what can be given a little focus as compared to that. Then the impersonal part, where he talked about the bureaucratic organization shall treat the all employees equally, and no special preference shall be given to any one particular. They also treat the customer equally in the same way, and there has to be no individual focus, no individual difference to influence any particular one. Then it's the employment based on technical qualification. So here he talked about that there has to be a selection as well as the promotion only based on the technical qualification or the skill of that employee. So these rules also received significant criticism, but this is what he talked about. Now for the next part, which is the neoclassical approach to management. Here the very first is behavioral science theory, or the experiment approach, which is known as. So under this, this was a bit different again. Why it was different? Because here this theory combined the elements of psychology, sociology, and anthropology to provide a scientific basis for the understanding of employee behavior. So it was the behavior of employee was very much focused here, and the reason that could influence that behavior was further very much discussed under this theory. It examines why employees are motivated by specific factors, how they can get motivated, how they can perform better, what are the reasons that can influence their behavior in an organization. So such as in social needs, the conflicts, and the self-actualization, self-realization. These can be the factors. So that way it recognizes individuality and the need of manager to be sociable. This approach is unique from the human relation theory, as it emphasizes leadership as determining factors in management success, which focused on the individual behavior that can get governed by different social needs, different factors. So it presents increased focus on group relationship and group behavior in an organization for the working or the effectiveness of that organization. Why this was done? Because of the main objective here was to predict that how an employee can behave in future, or what can be the collective employee behavior in the future. So the main propositions of this approach are enlisted below. Like an organization is a socio-technical system. Interpersonal or group behavior is very important. Goal of organization has to be harmonized with the understanding of human needs. Multitude of attitude, perception, and values are prevalent among employees. Different people have different perception, of course. They have different attitude. They have different level of understanding. So how and what are the factors? So different factors can influence different factor or people differently. So and that further can affect their or influence their performance also. So this entire approach was based on studying those factor and mitigating the conflict that can arise because of this different choice, different perception, different attitudes. So some degree of conflict is of course inevitable in an organization and not necessarily undesirable. So these conflict will also be the part of any organization, but the best way to understand the need or the influencing factor is to study them and implement them in the best way, so that maximum efficiency can be realized out of any employee or individual. Now the next is the social system theory or the approach. The main name which is associated here is of Mr. Chester Bernard, and in his work, which is the function of the executive, he categorized all organizations as a cooperative system. What such a cooperative organization, which is a system of consciously ordinate activities needed by individual to overcome his biological, physical, and social limitations. Now, in this theory, he further extended the scope, where he also included the biological and the physical limitation part. According to him, a cooperative system is a complex of physical, biological, personal, and social common, which are in a specific systematic relationship by reason of the operation of two or more person for at least one definite end. So according to him, like, there are several factors that included the physical, biological, personal, and of course the social common factors also, that can affect the systematic relationship among people and or any two or more person for any particular goal, any particular aim in a system. It's a kind of a system that includes individual with different perceptions, the different needs, all working under for a definite goal. Now he viewed three main elements here in an organization without which anything is not possible, and those three elements are: willingness to serve has to be there has to be a common purpose, and good communication. All right, so these three are the major three important element in an organization without which it cannot function well. He considered them that he considered the fact that and any organization cannot exist without these further, I mean, uh, the three elements discussed just right now. And his analysis of the manager's role is really a social system approach, considering all those factors. Mr. Bernard looks for the major tasks in the system in order to understand and analyze the functions of executives, where they operate, determining their task, which are to maintain system of cooperative effort in a formal organization. He was an early pioneer of the system perspective, because he talked about the any cooperative or any organization as a system approach, as specifically the social system approach, where all those just discussed factors influence the working of individuals. So that is why he was the very first to talk about any such approach. And his word encouraged subsequent management, and also they completely opened up a promising horizon in the developer of management thought, because now he gave a wide range to study. He gave so many factors. He encouraged subsequent management organization theorists to study organization as a complex and dynamic whole. He gave lot of scope to study further. So he opened so many aspects further, that gave an entire, complete, open, and wide range to study for further thinkers or the scientists or the theorists. Now, further is the modern management approach. Under this, the very first is system approach. Why it's called system approach? Because here the theorist or the approach, the people who have made contribution, they viewed any organization as an organic and open system which is composed of interacting and interdependent part. So they assume that there are small different parts that make different small units, and they combine to make an organized whole, and these small parts were called to be the subsystems. So they defined it as a system, to look upon management as a system, as an organized whole made up of subsystems which are integrated into a unity. So this approach explained that there are different small systems which are combined, the small system known as the subsystems, which are integrated further to make a complete unit or totality known as unity. So now this approach is based on the generalization that everything is interrelated. Since these small systems are combining to make a whole big system called the unity, that is why all these small systems are interrelated and interdependent. Now a system is composed of related independent elements which when in interaction form a unitary whole. So a system is simply an assemblage or combination of things or parts forming a complex whole. Now, one of its most important characteristic here that it is composed of hierarchy of subsystems. Further, when these systems are combined, there has to be a hierarchy that has to be well defined under this system, that which subsystem will work under which subsystem, which other subsystem. So this is the parts forming the major system. So this system approach talked about the subsystems forming a whole which is called unity. These subsystems are interrelated and interdependent, and further there has to be a proper hierarchy among these subsystems. For example, the world can be considered as a system in which various national economies are subsystems. All right. So this was just an example, like we have this entire global platform or the world where there are different nations that combine to make that whole world, and those nations can be called as the subsystems. Now the further there is the third part, which is the contingency approach. Under this modern theory approach, the second is the contingency approach. The second part is contingency approach. Why it's called contingency approach? Because it is based on the different situation or the consequences which are unforeseen. So this is the latest one of the latest approaches, and during the 1970s, this were the two names were very famous that contributed here, were Mr. J.W. Lorsch and Mr. P.R. Lawrence. They were critical, were not very supportive of the other approaches, so they combined their own, gave their own contribution. So they focused on the management problems that are different under different situation. According to them, management problem can be different under different situation, and so therefore they need to be tackled as per the demand of that particular situation. Meaning to say that they did not talked about one particular rule that has to be applicable under every situation. According to them, since the situation can be different, so therefore the solution or the angle to face or tackle those situations has to be different. So one of the best way of doing may be useful for repetitive things, but not for managerial problems. The contingency theory aims at integrating theories with the practice. So they talked more about the application part. In a way, they said that the behavior of an organization is said to be contingent on forces of environment. Hence, a contingency approach is an approach where behavior of one subunit is dependent on its environment and relationship to other unit or subunits that have some control over the sequence desired by that subunit. Meaning to say that they propounded that it is not necessary that each and every subunit needs to depend on the other subunit, because the dependency of any subunit would depend on the kind of environment that particular subunit belongs to. And also, if it depends on any other subunit, then that will only be governed by the factor or the reason that how much that another subunit is going to affect this particular subunit in need. So, meaning to say that they gave a complete new approach where they talked about interdependency also, but they talked about environment as a very, very important factor governing that dependency or the interdependency. Further, the third part under the modern approach is the quantitative approach. The exponents of this school believe that all the phases of management can be expressed in quantitative terms, in mathematical terms. However, quantitative as in they can be quantified to up to a certain extent. They can be objectified to a certain extent. So, but the other thing is that the mathematical models, of course, help in systematic analysis of problem, but models are not the substitute for sound judgment. That also has been talked about under this theory. So, moreover, mathematic quantitative techniques provide tools for analysis, but they cannot be treated as independent system of management thought. So, meaning to say here that the quantitative approach explained that how the mathematical models or the tools can be applied to a particular problem, but they are not the sole substitute for any sound judgment, because that any sound judgment of course need other factors also which do play very important role. So this theory, this approach talked about the that part where the management or the phases of management can be expressed in quantitative terms. So of course it use various mathematical models and tools for that, but of course that is not the only way to reach a sound judgment. These are a few sources that I referred to. Thank you so much, and you can